There's only one teacher that's ever allowed me to go in and speak to a class that way at NYU. His name is Mark Crispin Miller. He is a bold and courageous professor that has been at NYU for over 20 years, and now his job is on the line. Why? Because he challenges his students to critically think. This is what it appeared like in a local news broadcast. Take a look at this.
An NYU professor who teaches a course on propaganda told his class that there is significant evidence masks don't help prevent the spread of COVID.
And as soon as NYU officials got wind of that, they weren't exactly pleased. Professor Mark Crispin Miller tweeted that NYU was displeased that he questioned masking in his online propaganda class. Another person responded to his tweet asking where they could find the abundant, significant evidence that masks don't prevent the transmission of COVID. While a university spokesperson responded in part by stating, amid reports about this online class, we have communicated directly with the students in it to remind them of the guidance from health authorities.
Well, at the center of this is really a set of tweets, and it appears to be one student that was really upset with what was being taught in this classroom. So let's take a look at the tweet. This is, obviously we blurred out this person, they deserve anonymity. At NYU University, an MCC tenured professor spent an entire class period telling students that wearing masks doesn't prevent the spread of COVID-19 and that hydroxychloroquine trials were made to fail so more people would be given the vaccine and have their DNA changed. He followed up that class by sending us links to anthraxvaccine.blogspot and radical.org/pandemic. I don't know what that ends up going on to say, as sources to back up his in-class arguments against masks and vaccines. I have forwarded the emails to the NYU Bias Hotline. The latter website links many far-right and conspiracy websites such as The Charlie Kirk Show, Zero Hedge, Technocracy News, Medicine Uncensored, Great Game India, WorldNet Daily, The High Wire with Del Bigtree, Global Research, What's Up with That, One News Now, and more. His own conspiracy website, News from Underground, MarkCrispinMiller.com, has articles such as growing research indicates many COVID-19 cases might not be infectious at all, and on the parallels between 9/11 and the COVID-19 crisis. Obviously, this student is very upset. And the school, I'm assuming one of Mark Crispin Miller's peers, responded this way in a tweet. Thank you for reporting this issue. We as a department have made this a priority and are discussing next steps. Well, to understand what's really going on here, I'm honored to invite onto the show right now Professor Mark Crispin Miller. Boy, you have really spun one up this time. I thought you would have achieved it when I went and spoke to your classroom a couple of times over the last several years, but nobody seemed like that I was, a big enough issue to try and get you pulled from the school. But give us a sense, right? This isn't a medical class. Why are you talking about masks? What is this class you're teaching and that I've spoken at? What's it about?
Well, it's a course on propaganda, which I've been teaching at least twice a year at NYU for maybe 20 years or more. It's always, heavily enrolled, extremely popular. And I have to say, it bears no resemblance to the account that you just kind of managed to tease out of those tweets and that appalling NBC news piece. Completely misleading, misleading.
Well, enlighten us. What is the class about?
Yeah, this is a course on the study of propaganda, which, unlike a lot of other academics, I do not teach just by going back in time and, talking about the Nazis and the Bolsheviks, maybe looking at the Allied propaganda in World War I. In other words, I don't teach propaganda as a kind of remote phenomenon and an academic subject. I teach it more in the spirit of a kind of necessary civic activity of questioning dominant narratives by looking at as much information as possible and making up your own mind. I did not tell my class, don't wear masks. In fact, I specifically told them that I was not telling them not to wear masks. I was not discouraging mask wearing. There's a very strict rule at NYU on that very point. I said, this is an intellectual exercise. I begin every propaganda course, every term, by making clear that my approach is one, again, of encouraging a kind of impartial and thorough study of dominant narratives by looking at as much information and data as possible. You have to do that. That's what I think higher education, and indeed lower education, should be all about, is teaching students how to think for themselves. And I said this last September, I said, now look at the way we're meeting this semester. We're meeting by Zoom. You know, this is completely unnatural. Why are we doing this? Well, we're doing it because of the COVID crisis. And the COVID crisis has been driven by thunderous propaganda drives. And I made the point, propaganda needn't be nefarious, it needn't be false, it can be accurate, but it's always only a partial account of reality, okay? So I said we could, for example, study aspects of the COVID crisis. More specifically, we could study the mask mandates. You may be interested to know, and I encourage you to read, there are actually more than that. I didn't know this at the time. The 8 randomized controlled studies of mask wearing in hospitals by health professionals, all of which have found that masks are ineffective barriers against the transmission of respiratory viruses. I encourage you to read those. I will send the links. I also encourage you to read the more recent studies finding otherwise. And I gave them some guidance as to how a layperson might begin to assess the scientific soundness of a study. Okay, I won't go into that guidance now. We don't have time. But I mean, they're laypersons. They needed some advice on how to assess scientific studies.
Well,
So
are most professors really teaching students, if that's not your area of expertise, you're not capable of reading a scientific study? Is that the sense of what you're up against when you have a classroom of children or of actually young adult students? Do you have to tell them you're allowed to read a medical study and you're allowed to, there's ways to actually glean some information from it?
Well, that's actually a pretty big question. I mean, academia generally is over-specialized and people focus very narrowly on their own fields. But I felt obliged to let them know that they did have the right to look at, for example, scientific reviews of new studies. You can find those. I also suggested that they look at the universities where certain studies come from to see if they have financial relationships with big pharma or with the Gates Foundation, which would raise questions about whether there were conflicts of interest. This
You're
is just
teaching
common
them critically thinking and really decent journalism, which I've been complaining about. Just how about investigate the source? Don't just take an expert for their word. Ways that this is what we do on the High Wire, right? Let's dive deeper. Where can you look? This isn't, hidden in some basement somewhere or archive. This isn't, like Raiders of the Lost Ark, where it's been put in some museum that you'll never see it in a basement. A lot of this stuff's available to us.
Well, that's absolutely right. The students' tweets were a little upsetting. They weren't that big a deal to me because when you study propaganda, when you make the effort, or I should say, when you encourage students to look at propaganda narratives in an impartial and thorough way, okay, you're basically telling them not just to look at the propaganda that they don't agree with, because anyone can spot propaganda if they don't agree with it. So you ask a liberal, what's propaganda? They'll say Fox News. You ask a conservative, what's propaganda? They'll say MSNBC. Well, yeah, they're both right. But the trick is to look critically at propaganda that pushes your buttons, okay? This means, in other words, that you have to be prepared to move out of your comfort zone. You have to be prepared to question things you've taken for granted for a very long time. I mean, I've had to do this throughout my life. If you are alive and your mind is still active and growing, you're naturally going to question things you thought were true. And you do that once you begin to study propaganda. Okay, not every student can handle this.
Right.
Sometimes students get upset. This student is one of them. She got extremely upset. She didn't hear everything that I had to say on the subject. She only heard certain things and she flipped out, okay? That
Now, is this a student that was in your class from day one? I mean, I've seen how you set your things up. You do a lot of caveats on what this class is going to be about.
Well, Del, let me make clear, she wasn't there from day one. She was a late arrival. So she missed a lot of the caveats, okay?
All right.
She only heard a resumption of the subject when it came up the following week. So she only heard part of the story, and she overreacted. What is troubling, and the reason why I'm on here today, is NYU's response to this, which was identical to the response of NBC Local News. That was my department chair who tweeted his thanks to her and publicly assured her that we as a department have made this a priority and are discussing next steps. Well, what is this? This is my termination. She tweeted that NYU should fire me for having dared to encourage the students to read the evidence that masks are ineffective barriers against respiratory viruses.
Wow.
My chairman publicly assured her that the whole department was taking steps to make this happen. I was not consulted. I am a member of that department. I think I may be the senior member of that department. Nobody said a word to me. His tweet is still up, although I asked him to take it down. The dean of the school and the doctor who advises NYU on COVID rules both tweeted my other students directly, emailed them the next day without putting me on copy, okay? And told them that I had given them dangerous misinformation and sent a list
without asking you how that information was presented or what you actually put forward, went on assumption on a student they don't appear to know other than through tweets, and then making assumptions and then going to your classroom to say that you've been incorrectly teaching them.
Not only that, they did the opposite of what I do. They sent a list of what they called authoritative studies of masks from the CDC and told them to believe those. Okay, I never tell my students what to believe or what to think, never. Whatever's on my website, which is a separate issue, I don't tell my students what to think. These administrators did. And then finally, my chair pressured me into canceling the propaganda course for this semester. So I'm on medical leave. The stress of this whole ordeal has actually done me some physical harm. But if I were teaching, I would not be teaching that course. All right, this is what happened next. Because of these moves by my employer, I felt compelled to put a petition up at change.org with the help of some friends, because I thought this was a colossal wrong. And not only did I do this on my own behalf, because I did feel wronged and persecuted for, basically teaching students how to think for themselves.
Yeah.
The petition explicitly makes this statement on behalf of academic freedom in the name of all those professors, all those journalists, all those doctors and scientists, all those whistleblowers and activists who have been gagged or persecuted for their dissidence, not just throughout the year of COVID, but for decades. I mean, this kind of thing absolutely has to stop. And all the petition did, in making that point, was to urge NYU to respect my academic freedom, all right? Now, what happened next is the most astonishing thing of all. And you'll know this because you've seen me teach yourself.
Yeah.
A month after the student attacked me, a majority of my department colleagues sent a letter to the dean of the school that I teach in, the Steinhardt School, demanding that he order an expedited review of my conduct in the classroom, which they argued is so heinous that it should nullify my academic freedom. So my colleagues, all right, without consulting me, again, nobody talked to me, made the bold move of urging the dean to examine my conduct formally. And more astonishing still, it wasn't just about my heresy on masks. They accused me of discouraging students from wearing them, right? And of intimidating students who did wear them, both total fantasy.
Yeah.
But they went on to say that I'm guilty of hate speech, attacks on students and others in our community, advocating for an unsafe learning environment, microaggressions, basically every sin in the social justice playbook they accused me of casting me as this kind of domineering right-wing conspiracy crank who makes proclamations about Sandy Hook and the moon landing was a hoax, who berates students who don't agree with him. This is a caricature that bears no relation whatsoever to the reality of how I teach. None of them has ever seen me teach. Now, as it happens, this review, which the dean immediately ordered, again, without talking to me first, all right? This review has prompted me to urge current and former students and visitors to my classes like yourself to send in letters of support, and over 50 have come in, and they're all on my website. The long and short of it, Del, is that I wrote a point-by-point rebuttal of all these accusations. I sent it to my colleagues. I asked for a retraction and an apology, all right? For the same reason I put up the petition, because this kind of thing has got to stop. They ignored my request. I sent a follow-up. They ignored that. So I felt I had no choice but to sue them for libel, and that's what I'm doing. And we're now at a crucial moment in that story. My colleagues filed a motion to dismiss a few weeks ago. We responded with a brief demonstrating that their arguments are completely false. You know, they basically said, yeah, everything we said was really true, and we didn't really want to get him fired, so there's no libel. The brief demolishes their claims. I wrote my own affidavit that I encourage people to read. And then yesterday, as it happens, they sent a reply. So from this moment on, the judge could make a decision at any moment. He could ask for oral arguments from lawyers, or he could just decide. But the thing is, I want people to know, and I want in particular your audience to know what's going on here. Because this kind of thing has been going on much too much lately.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons, you know, we spoke yesterday, and I wanted to get you on the show right away, just as we have had Dr. Scott Jensen on from Minnesota, who clearly stated the issues that were going on with changing how the death certificate was reporting COVID cases in Minnesota. And it didn't matter that he was a sitting senator. It didn't matter that he, I think, was nominated or was Family Doctor of the Year in Minnesota the year before. It doesn't matter that you're 20 years at NYU with this course, challenging students to think on their own. I've been in your class. You challenge them to challenge you. It's a really open forum. It's a beautiful class. It's one of those classes that were those rare gold mines you'd find in school, whether it was high school or college or wherever, where you actually found that there was something exciting going on and true critical thinking, instead of just having to memorize and dictate back like parrots something that the teachers wanted you to know. So you've got this lawsuit going on. It's critical right now. Obviously, I never before thought that I would be into litigation, but that's what the Informed Consent Action Network does. We're not directly involved, but if you want to help Mark Crispin Miller's case, please do go to GoFundMe. This is, a teacher at NYU. He's I can tell, by the way that we had to configure your room that you're not living in a mansion somewhere in the Hamptons. You're doing great work, and whether or not all of the studies that you shared are accurate, the point was it brings up discussion. And I know when we talked about this, you referenced in your class, I think it was Denis Rancourt, and he put together this great compilation of, I think it was 8 famous studies on mask wearing throughout the years. He, of course, got attacked, and I know some of the students pointed that out. And just to be fair, these tweets got both negative and positive responses. Here's some of the negative responses that came in from students. How did you come to this wacky conclusion? How long have you studied viruses? That's right, you haven't, so hush. I get a lot of that myself. Here are 2 facts. COVID-19 is not a flu-like respiratory virus. It is a very different virus with a very different epidemiology. Claims that masks are ineffective in preventing COVID-19 are propagandistic Yep. Propagandistic and contradict the public health evidence. Congratulations in torpedoing your career. Hopefully no one have to clean up the mess when you jump. Of course, you've had support too. Here's some of those tweets. I read the tweets from one of your students. It's shocking that they're complaining about being taught to think critical. It just goes to show that this could be a deeper issue. And it's possible this element of learning has somehow been missed in early education. Good for you. Kids need to think and ask questions about everything. Well, don't let that dissuade you. The pushing of the face diaper is one of the biggest propaganda campaigns ever. Keep questioning the narrative. Keep thinking aloud. So all, of course, and this is what's great, right? This is what is, I think NYU should be known for, right? Is creating dialogue, bringing this debate to the forefront. I'm honored that you would decide to bring this story to us. So again, can we still sign that the original petition? He only wanted 35,000. We're already at 29,000. Let's push this over the top this week. Let's show that we too want freedom of thought inside of our universities, and we want professors to be free to allow students to have debate over controversial topics. We can make a difference there. And for those of you that donate and make it possible to do what we're doing, obviously, if you've got a little bit of extra, maybe, pitch in that latte or that coffee this week and go ahead and put that into the GoFundMe for Professor Mark Crispin Miller. We got to stop this, and I know, our good friend Mary Holland, professor at NYU, tenured, teaching law for so many years, who's been so outspoken, works, very closely with Robert Kennedy Jr. And Children's Health Defense. Because of that work and her statements and discussions, she lost her job at NYU. Obviously, this student must be very excited to be able to plant their flag on the mountaintop of cancel culture, but somebody's got to push back, and I'm glad that you are. For people that are professors out there, do you warn them against this, or do you think that other professors need to step up and really start speaking the truth? What is the future of education in America?
Well, there is no future for education in America if it's just training for compliance, which is what my colleagues seem to think. I mean, one of them says in her affidavit that it poses a risk to what she called impressionable students to discourage them from wearing masks, which I never did. But to call them impressionable, it's very interesting. I think of them as adults. I think of them as young adults, and I see them as my intellectual equals. They're not as widely read as I am. They're not trained to be educators, but I approach them as equals. I don't see them as impressionable toddlers who need to be protected from some kind of disastrous mistake. I urge them to think. I can't emphasize that strongly enough.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, there is no such thing as education if it does not entail questioning received opinion and official narratives. We're going to have a totalitarian system any minute. I mean, it's lowering all around us, even as we speak. The fact that we even have to have this discussion is actually a very bad sign that things are seriously out of whack here. So I would say to other professors, and I've heard from quite a few, not just in this country, who've been faced with similar attacks, you've got to fight back, if you can. If you're able to fight back without getting fired, if you're tenured, right?
Yeah.
You should deserve that tenure. I mean, tenure was instituted in the first place to protect academics who dared to do the kind of thing that I'm doing, right?
Yeah.
Those many professors who are tenured and simply toe the official line and engage in groupthink and even force that groupthink on their students, as some of the student defenders I've mentioned have pointed out, that my courses at NYU are unusual in that I don't push any kind of groupthink on the students. They actually referred to my class as a safe space where they felt free to question things that they're a little bit hesitant about questioning ordinarily. That's what education is supposed to be about. What we're witnessing now is this weird convergence of corporate and state interests on the one hand, okay? Mm-hmm. Big pharma, the Gates complex, those mighty powers. And then cancel culture, right?
Yeah.
Woke academics who use social justice dogma to persecute people who question certain pieties, right?
Yeah.
There's this weird kind of convergence. It's a little like the Cultural Revolution in China, where
Yeah.
student militants, helped Mao to basically, wipe out all resistance to his sway. I mean, I didn't used to invoke, communism in this way back when I was a regular leftist, but things have changed a great deal over the last year or so, and a
Yeah.
lot of things I used to dismiss as right wing. A lot of libertarian notions and the importance of freedom and so on. I've rethought, because again, rethinking things is a sign that your mind is alive and growing. If you don't question anything you hear, you're kind of dead from the neck up, it seems to
Then
me.
why have a brain at all? I mean, any
Why
one
have
of
a
us can
brain at
step
all?
into a line, and then us can be chained to the person in front of us and walk that line to wherever we're being guided to, whatever treadmill we're on, or whatever packing plant we want to stand in front of, and just repeat over and over
Right.
again what we're told. Mark, you're absolutely a beacon of light. You have been. I've been so excited the moments I've gotten to speak to your class. I know most of the students, I would probably guess all but almost one, are dismayed at what took place. And for the future of the students at NYAU, I hope they make the right decision and recognize that free thought and discussion is our only way forward if we're going to be the great nation that we are, and the great institutions of education that people used to travel from around the world, from China, from Germany, from Korea, to come to America to really learn about freedom. So, I want to say to our audience out there, please, let's help Professor Miller out. If you can, go to change.org. Let's help out with this case so that he can prove that this is no way to handle Professor in court, which is where these things end up having to go when you are under attack by cancel culture. And definitely sign that change.org petition, because it's important not only for this case, but as you're saying, we bring on professors all the time, so many of them under fire for telling the truth, whether it's about vaccines or chemicals or sugar or cholesterol. We've reported on all of the bullying that's taking place in higher learning to shut people up. So Professor Mark Crispin Miller, thank you for sharing your story. Keep your head up. Know that at least our audience, and I'm sure everywhere else that you get a chance to speak, we stand with you, and we thank you for stepping up for critical thinking and free thought in this great nation, and for those professors around the world.
Thank you, Del. Just right back at you. I'm an admirer of yours for the very same reason. Let me just add that this money is going into an escrow account that my lawyer is controlling, so I'm not going to be going off to Ibiza with the proceeds. This is all about the lawsuit.
All right, that's great to know. We wish you the best of luck, and I'll keep you in my prayers. Take care.
Thanks.